The reason why I wanted to talk to you is that I've been looking at your point of views, your TikToks and your point of views on
Yeah,
all the
sure.
estrangement. And I like how you're like, let me see, how can I put it? You are not blaming, you're giving the parents some grace. And I like how you're giving the parents some grace with it. I love your religious background. And if you just want to tell us a little bit about your religious background and how you got here, how you feel about the whole estrangement space at this particular point.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I am a Christian, so I became a Christian right after acting school did not work out. So this was way back in 1998. I was going to the number 2 acting school in the country, and I was asked to leave because I was not really engaged in the community. I would say I was falling into a pretty significant depression. I just read tons of books, and I became a Christian right around that time. I had a very troubled relationship with my own father. My father was an alcoholic, and there was some real troubling situations with him when I was a kid. Won't go too much into. And at the time, I realized just through my own faith experience that I was no better than him. I had found a lot of comfort in my own bitterness on hating him, thinking that I was somehow this wonderful person. At that time, I was also dabbling into some things that alcohol and drugs and other things that just I was like, wow, who am I to judge? Had to swallow my own pride. And through that, and really through my own faith experience, was able to forgive him and love him. At first, it was so funny because he would get mad at me because I'd go in and just give him a big hug and a kiss, and he would tell me to leave me alone. But I kept doing that and doing that. Now we actually have a fantastic relationship. My mother died in 2004, so exactly 22 years ago yesterday of cancer. She was my secure person. She had really, if it wasn't for her, I don't know where I would be. But she really raised us in a lot of ways on how to
are
be a
you're a Gen Xer, right? Are you a Gen
I
Xer?
am, yeah, born in 76.
So
And
I'm a boomer.
cool. Yeah. So they were too. And then
Everyone hates boomers.
oh, no, it's good. My mom died, and then my father, I think he took a lot of responsibility for some stuff, but we also had a better relationship. Now, dad is on the end of life. He's about 82 now. He's got dementia. I'm so glad that I was able to forgive him and move on. So I understand where people, especially when they've had troubled childhoods, a lot of my podcast stuff is not necessarily talking about people who've been severely, where there's a lot of abuse and alcohol. I understand that took, even for me, that took a long time. What I had to realize through that process, and this goes all the way back to Carl Jung, that there's something about what he would call shadow work. And there's an element of that even in Christianity where you have to realize like you're really no better than the people that you judge. Carl Jung understood this right after World War II. He's speaking to a lot of the youth who purportedly believed that they were somehow the more enlightened ones. And here you have a Holocaust and you have over 100 and something million people die through communism and whatnot. And it's just kind of, okay, let's swallow our own pride and understand that you have the capacity to do just as much evil as anybody else. And I do come from that element that I see a lot of kids who just cut off and they'll say something like, I'm getting rid of the root. And I'm like, good luck with that because you have to understand that you are that root and you do have the capacity to create harm. And part of the beauty of exoneration and seeing and struggling with your own parents is there is a dynamic where once you're able to see yourself in that element, you could then have healthier boundaries with the people that are in your life. And you don't just try to, what I would say, overcorrect what you were raised with, you balance it. So I think if I didn't forgive my father, I would have overcorrected what I experienced. And I would have probably been a very hovering, overprotective parent, which wouldn't have necessarily been better, but through the process of exoneration, I think I was able to really balance my own parenting as well with my own kids. And there is evidence of that. There's a good book called Parenting from the Inside Out by Daniel
What
Siegel,
is that?
Parenting from the Inside Out, where he talks about that. He really does emphasize the need to exonerate your own parents because if you don't, you'll end up doing damage because you're trying to overcorrect, and overcorrection never really leads to a healthy balance. So I hope that's where I come from and
No,
why.
I understand that because I'm a boomer and I'm at the tail end of the boomer. I'm 66. I was born in 59.
Yeah.
So my mother's 90. I had a really fraught relationship with her my whole life. I don't want to get into my whole situation, but I was the scapegoat. My sister was a golden child. My mother's an extreme covert narcissist. My sister and I were like literal extensions of her. Everything was
Mm.
about her. She got divorced when I graduated college. I had to get a job right away. I had to work in college because I had to support her. I had to help support her. All of those things. But I never cut her off. I would go in and out of no contact with her. And I would come back to her, like, when I got pregnant, when I had my baby, when little, like, things where you really need your mother, I would utilize her for those things, and things would be okay for a while, and then weird things would happen again. Because I didn't get therapy when I was younger, my choices were different than I probably would have had if I would have settled my childhood
Yeah.
with my mother, and then I
Mm.
would have not overcorrected so bad. So, the only thing
Yeah.
I learned, my mother taught me 3 things. She taught me children are to be seen and not heard, do what I say, not what I do, and marry a rich guy. Literally the 3 things. Just look pretty and marry a rich guy. That's what she taught me, which she'd probably had limited tools from what she was taught from
Yeah.
her parents that were from the silent even before the silent
Mm.
generation. But if I would have made different choices, I would have married somebody different, and I would have had probably a different outcome. And it seems that I don't know the statistics on this, but a lot of baby boomers got divorced when they were in their 40s. A lot of this problem, like I said, I was estranged but didn't talk about it. Like people would say, "How's your?" I never came out being estranged.
Mm.
I would talk to her for 5 years, not talk to her for 3, talk to her for 5 years, not talk to her for 10 over the 50-year span. These other mothers seem to be in the same space as me. I'm sure everybody's situation is different, but I believe that there's a lot of overcompensation that they did from even if they weren't traumatized by their mother's covert narcissist, we left and we didn't come back till it was nighttime. Our parents never knew where we were. They never knew what we were doing. They had no beat on us at all. We grew up in the whole drug generation and the music
Yeah.
generation, so
Sure.
we were going to a lot of concerts, we were doing a lot of drugs. We weren't really alcoholics, like, alcoholic wasn't our thing. It was like we were more like
Mm.
into Quaaludes and, like, drugs and stuff like that, but I believe that a lot of mothers, I'm only saying this from what I'm reading from these other mothers. I believe that they overcompensated and tried to give their child and their children everything that they didn't have from their parents. And when the children turn around and go, I don't want to talk to you now. The mothers are getting to the point where they're saying, but I gave you everything. You went to the best schools. You took piano lessons. You took flute lessons. You went to ballet. You went to hockey. I showed up for every back to school night. My parents didn't even know what a back to school night was. I showed up for every back to school night. I flew you to college, did your dorm rooms. Then I feel like the parents feel like because they did all those things that the parents feel that the children were ungrateful and they don't understand why the adult children, it seems to be the millennials that seem to be the ones that are doing this, particularly at this particular point where they're talking about it. But I feel if you really got deep down into it and you started to really sit with yourself and realize what you did to not cause this, but to move this along, I believe that there is a lot of blame on the parents' side and the children's side as well,
Mm.
but I think the parents coming off and saying, "You're ungrateful. I gave you the best of everything. Now I'm cutting you out of the will." I don't believe any of that is helping the situation now. And
Right.
I think that the parents are stuck in a continual loop of this echo chamber and they don't
Mhm.
know how to get out of it. And the hurt is so immense that it's like overtaking
Yeah.
and eating them. So,
Sure.
how do you
Yeah, no, I like what you're yeah. And I think we get so fused to the past. And what I mean by that, I think we look at the past and we have the past and it just does this. It just covers us. And I've really been influenced by a form of therapy called ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. And it talks about the primary course when you look at a lot of suffering, especially mental health suffering, is when we are fused to the past or fused to the future. And then to deal with fusion, we try to emotionally avoid it. And then we do it again, emotionally void, do it again, emotionally void. And so when you take somebody like who has a panic attack, my clients who have panic attacks, it's not the anxiety that's the problem. It's the anxiety. And then I'm angry that I'm having anxiety. And now I'm scared that I'm angry, that I'm having anxiety, and now I'm anxious that I'm angry, that I'm scared, that I'm having you get where I'm going with that. You just
Right.
think they're panicking. And so what ACT really teaches is to defuse. And what defusion is, it's to say, okay, I'm having the thought that I'm scared to go on this airplane. Okay. I'm having the thought that I can't talk to my child right now. Okay. And rather than trying to emotionally avoid it or trying to allow that to cover you, to accept those thoughts and then to put it in the context of your story so that you could live according to your values in the present moment. So, what's most important, what I see with a lot of cutoff on both dynamics is we want to talk about something that we have no control over anymore. I can't talk to you about something that happened in 1997. I can say sorry, or I can hear that's still holding you. But if a child is saying, for example, I have to cut you out of my life because you won't acknowledge the trauma that I received in my childhood. That makes no sense. That's a very manipulative tactic, too. You have to make it very present. And what's so much more effective is to say, hey, I'm having a hard time having a conversation with you in the present moment because every time I talk about our children, Mom, you cut me off and then you immediately start talking about yourself. And I need you to talk about what your grandkids are doing because it would make me feel more included. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful communication. I rarely see kids who are cutting off their parents communicate that effectively to their parents. In fact, I would even say, I don't know if I've ever seen it. It's always this vague, distant approach, hands length. You didn't do this and this, but they rarely are talking about, no, I want to bring this really in the moment, in the here and now, right now. Because here's the thing, that's the only thing that you really have control over. I don't have control at all about the past or the future. I only have control over 1019, the fact that I'm talking to Mindy Frankel
Yeah.
at Endicott College in Beverly, and wherever you are. And that's all I have control over. I don't have control of what's even about to happen in 11 o'clock class. I could prepare for that, but I don't have control over that. I don't have any more control than about the 9 o'clock class I just taught. I could reflect on it, but I don't have control. And so I think what I really want to teach people to do in both scenarios is focus on the present moment, focus on the here and now, focus on what you can control, and then move on from there that are in line with your values, not in your goals, but your values. Uh, Because if you want to cut off your mom and dad, or if you want to cut off your kid, I don't see how either of those are going to be in line with the values in the present moment that's going to help you be more flexible. But if you're willing to say, look, I do want you to include me in your conversations while you talk to me about our grandchildren. Why? Because my value is to have you in my life so that you can be more of a influence for good, then you have a right to be assertive to your mom and dad that way. That's okay. I'm fine with very assertive communication between daughter and parent. I reward that. What I'm very cautious with, I should say, is the whole very ambiguous language, vague language that is propped up in this kind of pseudo virtue signaling. I have to get rid of the toxic people in my life. And I'm like, okay, but you understand that's toxic as well because you're immediately villainizing your parents. You're putting yourself as the hero, and there's
I
no,
agree.
yeah,
Complete
and
black.
that's not healthy, not just for your parents, but that's also not healthy for your spouse. That's not healthy for your own kids. That's not healthy for your boss. That's not healthy for your church members. And if that is the way you're characterizing your binary view of reality, which by the way, I think a lot of millennials struggle with, because millennials, that's an interesting discussion because I will say that your generation, they did abandon spiritual in a lot of ways. And I think that's good. My own parents will take responsibility of this.
I
God is dead. I think the Time magazine article. And just let's just live according to our pleasure. And then when you take millennials are really interesting because that's the group that were very high in social justice, but they didn't believe in God, which is a very interesting take. And then when you go right all the way down to Gen Z, they're the skeptics. They're just like, I don't know what to believe.
well,
And
they're
so
most screwed. They're basically the most.
I have the most hope for them. I actually do. I really like teaching them. I love teaching my Gen Zs. I find them,
They,
oh, I think they're after COVID, I think they have this kind of refreshing skepticism on this dogmatic binary social justice view of the world. Because here's the thing, they lost their prom from those people. And so I find them to be a lot more open, a lot more, yes, they are lost, but I see that as a good thing. I have enjoyed teaching them a lot more than I would say the late millennials, just from a personal standpoint. So,
my children are millennials. I
yeah.
know that my children, as I'm going through this journey on trying
Mm,
to figure out what happened, and now that I'm through the stages of grief and I can actually look at this in an objective kind of way and look at myself, sit with myself, figure
yeah.
out what happened to me and why this happened. A lot of and talking to all the therapists that I've been talking to, you included, I spoke to another therapist and we were trying to understand boundaries and why the millennials are angry at the parents. And the parents, my generation of boomers, were very controlling, even though I said to myself, I wasn't controlling. Was I controlling? I basically told my son there was like four schools I wanted him to look at. I basically picked out what careers both of my kids should have. I took them to see the four schools, but it's not like they each came to me with ideas of what they wanted to do and where they wanted to go. Although I would have listened to them, but I remember when they were graduating from college and they were flying by all the career jobs that they were getting. And
Yeah.
I felt like I had a big hand now. Had I been even stronger, more motivated to control them more, if I was more of a controlling person, I could have like literally controlled, which the baby boomers are accused of, were accused of controlling, even though it was good control, we're also controlling where they live, what house they
Mm,
buy. We're giving them money for a house. We're giving them the down payment money, but we're telling them not me. But I've had other mothers that have said that they gave their kids the down payment money, but the kids had to live like within a 10-mile radius of their house. Like they couldn't move to another state or whatever. The baby boomers were a lot wealthier than the millennials are. Well, maybe the millennials, I don't know. The baby boomers, we were wealthy. We had a lot, not wealthy, but we had a lot of housing opportunities. There's that power struggle. And I think that the moms were very controlling, not in a bad way. I don't mean that they meant it in a malicious way, but they were controlling because our parents had nothing to do with us. And
yeah.
literally, do you
Yeah.
see how that's a thing?
I do. And to make it in the present moment, if I could be a little insensitive here,
No,
what I would say to whoever decides to say, "Oh, you were controlling," and I would say this clinically, so what? Okay. Like, how you're not if he was sitting right in front of me and said my mom was controlling, I'd be like, "Okay, so what? How does that affect you right now?"
well,
Your
I
mom
think
was and this is the way I would just and this is what I would do. I would just be like, "Okay, so you just told me you're about to go on a job interview. We're talking about how your mom was controlling. I'm still confused on how your mom being controlling, that was a good or a bad thing." And this is one of my videos that I said, you cut off your story. And when I brought up like Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, I loved his concept of the eternal recurrence because the eternal recurrence is a philosophical claim that says people are the healthiest when they can say, I would have all the hurt over and over again, rather than saying, "Oh, no, if my mom was not controlling and she was super passive, I totally know my life would be a lot better." But you don't know that. I don't know, maybe. Actually, your life might have been a lot worse. You're making an assumption, but I would say,
no, I
it's
know, I
like
understand.
and this is the problem. I think this is the problem with there's a lot of determinism in our field, and that's why it's been so debunked too. Psychology is getting it's and this you see this with a lot of the trauma narratives. And I'm reading a really good book right now by Joel Paris called The Myths of
You told me-
and he talks quite a bit about how a lot of these trauma therapists will overly focus on the past as if the past just determines your whole life. And again, going back from an ACT perspective, acceptance commitment therapy, I would just say, all right, fine, your mom was controlling. But how does that? I'm still confused. And this is where I would really press clinically, but I also think you could press this personally. You don't have to be a therapist to do this. How does that determine right now on how we heal? Do you want me to say I shouldn't have been controlling? And then if I say that, we now have a better relationship? And they might say, oh, here's the thing. If they say yes, okay, I shouldn't have been controlling. Are we now going to go get breakfast every Saturday? No. Okay, so that's a BS need. You're just complaining. If you're saying, this is why whenever I teach communication, I want the person to describe, I want them to emotionally tell me what's going on, I want them to assert their need, and then I really want them to reinforce. If that need is met, then you'll see a change of behavior. And you, as a listener, have to really make sure that if they ever decide to come back in your life, they fill in all those gaps. Otherwise, you end up taking an excessive amount of guilt that you don't have to take. Because, and this is what I had to realize, even with my own dad, it was easier for me to hold on to bitterness because then I could just drink and I could, yeah, look at all the people at the bar. What are they doing? They're drinking their sorrows away without necessarily dealing with the hurt in their lives. They're emotionally avoiding. It was harder for me to say to my father, say to the person that hurt me, hey, I need you to take responsibility for this because if you don't, you and I can't heal. And I remember having that conversation with people that really hurt me. And that was not an easy discussion, but there was a struggle with that. And there was a sense of healing that occurred after that. And this is why contempt is so damaging to the human heart for relationships, marriages, especially. It's the reason why people divorce is because rather than stating to you what I feel and what I need, partners will often just hold it all in and it does a lot of damage. And so not just to yourself, but to the people around you. So if a child is saying, mom is controlling, okay, fine. So what? She was controlling. Now what? What are you communicating? Anyway, and I think it's just, I see so many parents just take an excessive amount of guilt because their child says something like that. And I would just be like, fine, I was. Okay, what are you going to do about
You don't cut your parents out
it?
because they gave you 4 colleges to go to and then drove you to every
No,
college and
no,
flew you to every college and looked at them and then did your dorm rooms. You know what I mean? You don't cut
yeah,
your mother out you don't cut your
sure.
mother out for taking you to Bed Bath& and Beyond and filling your room up with towels
No,
and shampoo.
right.
We were controlling, but I don't think we were controlling where we were badly impacting them, but a lot of the kids are saying that I don't know, they lost themselves, they're emotionally I don't know.
Why is that? Yeah. And for that, I'm like, why is that my problem? Okay, you lost yourself. Why is it your parents' problem? Why isn't it
Right.
your problem? And how do you find yourself? What does that even mean? You lost yourself. And I just, what I would like, let's stop with the bullshit and let's just come together and let's really work on the feelings and the needs so that we can heal this relationship. And there's a
Just
lot of conflict avoidance going on, and we're running away from the fire rather than facing it. And it's going to do a lot of damage.
you talk to all these mothers and you say, your daughter's going to go strange, your son's going to go strange. The mothers would all say, there's no way we have such a great relationship.
Hmm.
And they're blindsided. They're like
Yeah.
completely blindsided. And the complication, so you get blindsided. And I don't know what's going to happen to these grandchildren at some point when they grow up. Can you talk to that at all? I know you can't predict the future, but what do you predict will happen?
I think we could
Feel about
predict.
that.
Yeah, I think you could predict. If you have a binary view of the world, good luck of that when your own kids push against your own binary way of thinking upon them. I do think if your kids are raised with this concept, and I can't, no, you're right, I can't predict the world, but if you're teaching your kids, say, for example, these people over here are dangerous and we over here are righteous. And I see this in religious communities. So one of the benefits, like just because I find myself to be drawn to Christianity, I also saw a lot of the toxic things that happen in churches as well. In fact, I'm writing a book right now called Under the Pew. And hopefully I need to kick myself and try to finish this within the year.
Do
It
it.
talks about narcissism and borderline and how they use spiritual places to create this very binary view of the world.
I did an interview with a woman that her daughter got sucked into a church mega church cult.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
It's very easy. It's very easy to look at, and we're prone to binary thinking. Like, we're prone to think that the world is created of dark side and light side, and these people are good and these people are bad. It's happening right now politically. It's happening right now,
About the political.
100%. Yeah, look at what's even happening politically as well. These people who voted for Trump are evil. These people who voted for this person is evil. We're the righteous ones. And so when you have that kind of view of reality, it will actually affect you because you are also, there's a really good verse in scripture that says, if you're going to judge people according to the law, this is the whole book of Galatians is on this. You're going to also be a lawbreaker yourself, and you're going to condemn yourself because it's impossible to obey all the law. The minute you start to put the world into righteous versus evil, you will fall into the evil category, even by just your own actions, by being human. Your children will see that and see the inconsistency, and that will cause them to not trust the thinking as much, or to question it, or to push back against that. There's going to be this inversion between people who are going to be the younger adults eventually, especially if the parents are cutting off their own parents and then they have kids. Good luck trying to apply that model of thinking to them, because I think that's where the grief is going to occur. I think what's going to happen is this: you're going to see cut off, cut off, cut off. Those kids then will then reapply what they just did to their parents, because all family patterns, they repeat themselves. And then what you're going to see is a huge influx of grief from from these particular parents who thought just cutting off their moms and dads was noble, because now they're receiving the same repetition over here. But here's the thing: it's going to be too late, because these parents over here are going to be in their 80s, either dead or their mind is not going to be nearly as sharp. And so they're going to be highly isolated because there's no way to process some type of healing and repair. That's my quote prediction.
It's sad because the best years of the parent to teach the grandchildren all the things and to tell all the stories. How do you square that? If these kids come back in 10 years or the grandparents start looking for the parents, how do you square that? Then
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the thing. One other thing before I know you
Sure.
have to go, but one other thing that
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about. I believe in my heart, a lot of these situations are politically motivated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I agree.
where the and I'm not gonna pick a side because my
Sure.
best friend and I are we're 2 di I mean, one's Democrat,
Yeah.
one's Republican. I'm not gonna tell you because this is not what this is about.
Yeah.
We don't even talk about it. The day Charlie
Yeah.
Kirk died, we just mentioned it, moved on. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Sure.
Neither of us made a comment, we just said it. But these mothers, I feel that if that was my problem, that is so fixable.
Yeah. Right.
But
Mm.
I how do you feel about the mothers that are so MAGA that they can't get past the children are a lot more liberal than the
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a huge question, because I do think there's always been, like, in the population, and Jonathan Haidt makes this point too. People vote mainly from their personality differences. It actually has very little to do with logic. It actually has to do with the way you view the world. If you're more compassionate and you're more on openness to experience, the likelihood you're probably going to vote more for progressive. If you're a little bit higher on control, in the sense like you're very concerned about crime and safety, you may vote a little bit more conservatively. I think things have gotten a little bit more complex lately. Definitely. That's the way he evaluated it way back in 2008 when he came up with his book, The Righteous Mind. I don't know how he would evaluate it now, but people do vote according to just their personality preferences. You do see that a little bit on how we view the world. So there's always been like the way I teach at Endicott too is to try to respect the core differences and where both are coming from. And I think kids are not, I should say this, like, people actually aren't taught how to steel man the other position very well. And this goes all the way back to K through 12, I would say. Most younger generations are, I would say, they're only hearing one side of the argument. We do learn how to be compassionate when we can truly understand how the other one is viewing reality. That is just what happens. So I encourage people to read something like Thomas Sowell, by Sowell. He wrote a fantastic book called The Conflict of Visions. I can only say that what I've often seen is that when you hear somebody like I guess mainly a progressive accuse the other side, it's usually really missing what the other side is actually saying. And that could happen vice versa too. Unfortunately, we do live in, I think the polarization has been mainly because we're not talking anymore.
But I'm saying to
Yeah.
push for a mother to push her political view on her liberal child,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
it is unforced error in my point of view.
I would still push back and say, if I was meeting with the child and she's an adult and she's in her late 20s and early 30s, what I would still say to her, if she's my client, is you're going to come across people that are going to highly disagree with you. You have to be able to hold your own. Listen,
Not even have a conversation with
yeah,
them.
100%. Instead of getting so triggered, work on your own stuff. I, as a therapist, have to go to therapy because my own clients can easily, and Freud called this countertransference, affect me if I didn't work on my own issues. So going back on my own relationship with my dad, I had to make sure that I had all my bases covered because if I did have a client who struggled with alcohol and maybe he was more on the aggressive end, I didn't want to just lay right into him. I had to work on myself. And so I would still say to both parties, if that's an adult child who's in their late 20s, that's not the reason to cut them off. It's the reason to actually clarify much more assertively, hey, I don't want to talk about politics because we do end up getting in a streaming match. I would rather just talk about the game or grandkids and what's best for this. And that's a good skill to learn. And listen, that's life. I work with, listen, my clients, I've got radical Marxists and radical hardcore Trumpies. And guess what I do? I circumvent it and I talk about your marriage and I talk about your kids. I think they both
I
have
wish
worked.
that was
Yeah,
my issue.
sure. No, I do have to run it for
I know.
class.
Hey,
But
thank
thank
you.
you, Mindy.
I'm gonna
Right.
bug you. I'm gonna talk to you again.
Okay.
Have a
Okay.
great
All
day.
right. I'll talk to you soon.
All
All right. Bye
right.
bye.